you're like me and you've been following Minecraft for a while, you'll probably remember seeing your favorite Minecraft YouTubers playing on this classic dropper map, and I thought it would be fun to build these droppers in my hardcore world so that I could jump to my death anytime I wanted to. In order to save myself from going utterly insane, I decided to only build the 3 best droppers from the map: the iconic rainbow dropper, the funky glowstone spiral, and the toilet. In order to build these droppers, I'm going to need a lot of materials, but before I can do that, I first have to kill the ender dragon, get an elytra, and build a creeper farm for fireworks. After searching long and hard, I decided to build a wool farm designed by Just a Cute Doggo that produces over 2,700 wool an hour, which is pretty good, but I needed, let me just do some quick math here. Forward, ring around the roses, a puck of 9, over 300,000 wool blocks, meaning that I would have to AFK for over 111 hours. So I decided to just build 4 of them. While collecting materials for the sheep farms, I realized I was going to need over 1,000 redstone to craft all of the observers, dispensers, and powered rails needed for the farms, and instead of going mining, I decided to build a witch farm to get all of the redstone I needed. Once I got all the materials, it didn't take too long to build the 4 farms, but while I was building, my power decided to go out for like 3 days, delaying the process. But I came back, finished the farms, and now all that was left to do was to force sheep to breed hundreds of times and then shove 200 of them into a 1x2 hole where they would then spend the rest of their lives being worked to death by my automatic shearing system. Getting 200 sheep into 200 different holes is a lot easier said than done, and it ended up taking me over 8 hours to get all of the sheep into their holes. I'm not even kidding. When I tried to go to bed afterwards, I still heard the sounds of sheep ringing in my ears. After AFKing the sheep farm for a while, I finally had all the wool I would need for the first dropper. Or did I? Yeah, turns out I'm not very intelligent. I thought that flat worlds started at y0 when in reality they start at y-60, meaning my material calculations were off by several thousand. This became apparent when I used up almost all of my blue wool on the wall, only leaving me a couple stacks for the actual spiral, which would not be nearly enough. Thankfully, sheep can be sheared infinitely, however the shears that shear them cannot be used infinitely, and after my last AFK session I had completely run out of iron for shears, so I decided to build an iron farm designed by They6 that produces nearly 4,500 iron an hour. Thankfully, the materials required for this farm weren't too difficult to obtain, and I was able to finish building it relatively quickly. Now that it was finally finished, I would be getting more iron than I would ever need and be on my way to building these droppers. Or not. Yeah, it wasn't working correctly. Iron golems were barely spawning, and when they did, they usually spawned outside of the farm, which would cause it to completely stop spawning any golems, making it impossible to AFK. I double checked everything to make sure I built it correctly, and everything looked right, but I thought something might be wrong with the villagers, so I sent all of them to a better place and replaced them with new ones, hoping it would fix whatever wasn't working. This changed absolutely nothing, and instead of making a new one that actually worked, I decided to just completely spawn-proof the outside of the farm and just be content with my 400 iron an hour. After AFKing overnight, I had all the iron I needed to get more shears for the sheep farms, and was then able to obtain the remaining wool I would need for the droppers. Now it's time for an epic cinematic Minecraft time-lapse. Oh yeah, baby. Blue wool. Pink wool. I forgot to record magenta purple wool. We got like all the colors. This is so cool. In order to build the spiral part, I used a schematic of the dropper, but because it's so big, my computer can't handle the whole thing at the same time, so I had to do this spiral in 40 block sections. I know this time-lapse is cool and all, but I'll tell you what's not cool: placing 150,000 wool blocks. It took me over 30 hours just to build the first dropper. The next dropper was the Glowstone Spiral Dropper, which isn't as big as the other two, but it isn't just made out of wool. It requires a ton of glass and glowstone, and I don't have either of those things. I needed about 3 shulkers of glass, which means 3 shulkers of sand, and I could have probably just spent a couple hours mining in the desert, but instead I decided to spend around 8 hours collecting materials for and building a sand duper designed by Kelp MC that somehow produces 72,000 sand per hour. I honestly thought the title may have been lime, because that just seems like way too much sand, but after building it I realized it wasn't, because I was able to get the sand I needed in only 5 minutes. Now that I had all the sand, I just needed a way to smelt it into glass, and what better way to do that than to build a super smelter. Oh boy, another farm. Woohoo. Compared to all the other farms I've built so far, this one was super easy to build though, and saved me a lot of time on smelting. The next item I needed was glowstone, and a lot of it, roughly 7,000 blocks, which meant 28,000 glowstone dust. I first tried using my witch farm, and after AFKing overnight for about 12 hours, I had a grand total of 400 glowstone dust. This means it would have taken me 3 days of AFKing to get all the glowstone I needed, so I decided to look for an alternative method, which was this insane stacking raid farm designed by ENX04 that can produce up to 3,000 glowstone per hour. The rates are great, but actually building this is not so great. It took me absolutely forever to get all of the materials, and even longer to build this farm, but after struggling more than Sniper Wolf struggles to not dox people, I was finally finished, and all that was left to do was to click an armor stand for 7 hours. Or not. It wasn't working, so I double checked everything, changed a few things, and it still wasn't working. I spent several hours looking at the comments and going back through the video to see if I had missed anything, and it still wasn't working. While trying some last ditch efforts, I accidentally knocked down one of the villagers, and after that I decided to try a different strategy. Getting a silk touch pick and mining glowstone in the nether. It only took me 2 hours to get all the glowstone I needed, which is less than a third of the time it took me to make the raid farm. But nevertheless, I could finally start building the glowstone dropper. Oh yeah, time-lapse time baby, let's go! The spiral is actually super annoying to build, and I could never figure out a good strategy to build it, but after several hours, the glowstone dropper was finally complete. And after that, it was time to build the last dropper, the toilet. Even though it was the biggest dropper, I already had all of the materials needed from AFK in the sheep farms earlier, so it didn't take too long to build. And after adding some very important final touches, I had finally completed all 3 droppers. Now there was only one thing left to do. Ooh! Whee! I hope everyone has a good after yesterday. See you later. Bye-bye.